Scott County, providing safe, healthy, and livable communities.
Thank you, Suzanne, for connecting. All right, we'll move on to item 5. It's a Scott Delivers Day, and today we're going to hear about safety in our physical environment. Chris Harder is going to get us started. Welcome to you and to the panel.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. We're going to spend a little time with you today talking about the safety of our physical campus in the Scott County buildings. As you know, you have supported investments in safety for our facilities, primarily in the areas of building, technology, and some process improvements. And we just thought, because a lot of that work happens kind of behind the scenes, that it was a good topic to bring forward and just talk about what do we know about the results of those investments in these safety pieces. And so we have a distinguished panel of people here today to speak to the data that we have and what that data tells us, and maybe what data we still need to answer some core questions. So with that, I would ask the facilitators to introduce themselves, and then the panelists to introduce themselves, who you are and what department you work for, and then we'll get started.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Vanessa Strong. I'm the Natural Resources Supervisor for Scott County.
My name is Chris Loggy. I work for the Community Services Division.
Jake Grusing, Transformation Enterprise Services.
Good morning, Troy Beam, Fleet and Facilities Managers.
Wanda Kane, Security Operations Coordinator in Facilities.
Good morning, I'm Kevin Nelson. I work for Employee Relations as the Health and Safety Team member.
Good morning, everyone. Scott Redke, Scott County Jail Administrator.
Good morning. My name is Scott Haas. I'm the Director of Emergency Management and 911 Communications.
Brian Beasley, Facility Operations Manager.
Thank you. Vanessa, would you start us off?
Absolutely. So I was really surprised at how many key cards there were initially when you started these endeavors that basically probably don't get used. It's at about 200 or so, and you've worked really hard to reduce that number by a significant amount. So then I'm reading on page 13 this really interesting slide on the Justice Center. Now, I know very little about the Justice Center. I usually work with things outside, so this one was a little harder for me to wrap my brain around, and I thought, well, you know, if it's hard for me, maybe it's hard for others. And it's some really interesting data about how many unique key cards we have that can kind of bypass some of the point of entry systems, but then how many of them are actually used, it looks like, on a regular basis. Could you maybe help us understand a little bit more about why the slide is meaningful, or why we have so many badges that need to be able to do this, but really it seems like a small percentage of people that you actually use it, and kind of help us understand why this is important for us?
I can start. Yeah. Years back, most county employees had access just to the whole campus, Justice Center being part of the whole campus. So our process was to make sure everyone could get to where they were supposed to be. In looking more into the security aspect of the Justice Center and some vulnerabilities that arise there, and just looking at what we have in place, we've come to the conclusion that everyone needs the access, because they don't use it. So we're looking at the whole process of how that works. There are people who are in there every day. A lot of folks from Health and Human Services are in there. Attorneys and corrections staff need access in there, but we're in the process of kind of revamping the whole access process for that.
So can somebody speak to what that future state will look like?
Well, we anticipate that, and again, it's a response to the industry in general. There are far more counties that have full lockdown of their justice centers than we are willing to do. We understand that it's a burdensome situation for people that have to work there on a regular basis, daily basis. And so what our system will do is sort of look at all of the employees and try to figure out which ones really do need to avoid that sort of burdensome situation. And so it looks to us like I can't remember exactly what the numbers are, But some of the obvious players are probation, community corrections, those kinds of players who were constantly over there. And this will just reduce the liability and the risks that are involved in keeping that access open to everybody. It just limits the access so that we can kind of keep up with industry and reduce those risks.
I think the original intent was that if you were a Scott County employee, you were allowed to go around the point of entry. That was the intent. And I think since that time, we've determined in a different administration that the security needed to be tightened up for the Justice Center. And so we've taken steps to do that.
Do we know at the end of this revamping, how many staff will have the ability to bypass? Do we know that?
400.
Yeah, I don't have the numbers with, but I think it was around, I think we were going to reduce it by like about 100.
Okay.
The 300 range.
Okay, thank you.
If we stay with the Justice Center point of entry for a minute and go to slide 14. Interesting to see the items retrieved at the Justice Center point of entry. And I think in terms of keeping the courthouse safe from acts of violence, my question would be, are we retrieving the right stuff? One, and is anything getting through? Are there things that are getting through that shouldn't be getting through?
I do think, yes, we are retrieving the right things. So a lot of the items we receive are, things like more mundane things, tools, things that could be described as a weapon, but are not necessarily maybe what the average person would just assume is. There have been a couple instances where stuff has gotten through. We have adapted to that. I know we recently, the X-ray machine that we have at the Justice Center is newer, and so we've tightened up a few things on that. But I would say going forward that we are doing the right thing, and that there is a high degree of confidence that the deputies have over there. That I do think that if an incident does happen, there's a known response that people can react to, and then we can adjust to that whatever incident happened.
And this slide, excuse me, this slide really does tie into that previous slide in the conversation that's being had about who should be able to bypass the point of entry. We do recognize that the simple act of having to go through screening makes a lot of people become aware that maybe they're trying to walk into court and they have a box cutters in their pocket. Again, that can be an item that does show up in screening and does end up going into the box because it's something that's stopped before it gets there. These weapons that are stopped aren't always guns and knives and things we think about. It could be that box cutter. In fact, a lot of them tend to be just that. People who are normally carrying things to and from work, they got to go to court, they go in for the hearing. The visible presence of the point of entry forces people to acknowledge and check themselves before they go through that screening. So that in and of itself is a powerful tool in keeping the Justice Center safe. And it also ties into the conversation about who can bypass that POE. And one of the considerations that's difficult in a county environment like this is understanding that, yes, we have people who day-to-day work in the Justice Center and for good reason should be able to pass the point of entry screening. But we also have a population of people who are community members, people who have bad days, and sometimes the people going to court are our county employees. So part of the conversation is, what about somebody who does have the authority to bypass that point of entry, but maybe they're going through a nasty divorce? We still would want them going to the point of entry at that point. And that's why it makes sense for not everybody in the county just to have free access to bypass the point of entry. If someone's going for a court hearing that's relative to their situation, they should go through screening like anyone else.
So we made investments in that point of entry when the new building was constructed. And now we're looking at some additional investment to revamp that area. And can you talk about what the intended benefit is of the next investment there?
Yeah, so a big point of changing how the point of entry is utilized is putting the deputies in a better position to monitor the entry point. And so we will be switching the doors that people enter and exit at point of entry, putting the deputies so that in a position where they have better sight lines at the Justice Center. So for instance, right now, unfortunately, the deputies have their backs to open hallways, especially along that long hallway after you get through point of entry. And so putting them in a better position to just monitor everything, setting up a better work post for the deputies to monitor camera views and just create a better, safer environment. Like it'll go a long way, I think, to making everybody feel like that spot is a lot more safe.
Thank you.
If we look at slide 6, it looks like overall staff is rating the facilities as they feel very safe. However, in looking in the difference between 2022 and 2023, it looks like there's a little bit of a change upward in the unsatisfactory and the average, and just a slight change downward in the superior above average. Do we know from the questionnaire, are there any, is there any feedback that's given to say why they might feel if they're rating it unsatisfactory or average?
There may have been some comments, I don't recall what they were off the top of my head, but there were some comments in there about some of the security stuff that they were concerned about. But I think it was more around the safety of the environment versus the security of the environment. The ones that I remember, it was the slip and falls and those kind of things. I think that's what they were kind of referring to. That's what I recall in the survey. But there wasn't a whole lot of written responses. It was just the answer to the question.
So let's build off those slip and falls, talk about something I'm a little bit more familiar with. Slide 8 kind of goes into the heart of the slips and trips due to ice, one of the things we love best about Minnesota. So you face a very interesting challenge. You have trying to keep people physically safe on this campus while also balancing the environmental pressure to reduce the amount of salt that we're using, because we know that salt is killing our lakes, rivers, wetlands. We can't get it out. But yet people matter more than anything else, right? So how is that going, trying to find that balance between the two? And can you tell me a little bit more about like maybe your pre-treatment practices and what kind of things you're doing to kind of balance those challenges?
Sure, I can answer that one. So one of the changes that I think, one, we have to look at the KPIs, but how are we being proactive? And I think that's the stance here we definitely took on this. A couple things was weather. You don't know whether it's going to be ice or it's going to be snow, and the amount and the frequency of it. But a large bulk of the snow from the city plows are being pushed to the southern part of the street, which would be the north side of the building. I worked with the city last year to start pushing the bulk of that snow over so there'd be less treatment on that north side. Additionally, we started filling up our brine tanks, similar that the highway carries, so we can put a brine treatment that buys us time, probably from a ½ inch to an inch of snow. So we're not putting so much of our ice melt down, creating that high potassium runoff. So if we see that it's working and we don't have to add more salt, that's how we're mitigating that. Additionally, not only working with the city to move that snow to the north side using the brine, we are working with our contractors where we follow up every time after there's an event to make sure that they've cleared and used the right amount of product.
Okay. Is there anything else that you're hoping to do in the future to improve that situation even better?
Well, one of the things, again, is proactive, right? So more application proactive between every storm. We monitor that. We have a conversation with our crews prior to that every time. So each storm is talked about differently. I think we're going to continue with the brine. There's always an opportunity when you look in the future to heat it, but there's obviously a cost to go with that if we were to ever go down that route.
I will add to that this chart that we're looking at here doesn't really give us a real clear picture of slip, trips, and falls. When we talk about the reports of slip, trips, and falls, it's based on across the county, and it can be as simple as somebody tripping going up the stairways. That is reported as an injury, right? Those injuries may not result in any kind of medical cost or anything like that, but we file it with our insurer just to make sure that they're covered in the event that something goes on. When we look at some of these higher numbers here, we can isolate where those happened on ice, but oftentimes that happens on ice in remote locations. Maybe an inspector going at a new construction site or something like that. Some of these numbers look like that. In other times, for instance, if we look at the 2023-14, 10 of those happened within January and February, 2 different icing and snow events. And so we have a bulk of those that happen at the beginning of the year or at the end of the year due to the snow events. But oftentimes those numbers are kind of deceiving because at least 3 of those were either trips upstairs or just trips in the middle of the hallway and fell and hurt themselves. So I just want to kind of put that in perspective. When you see these big numbers, that doesn't mean we have people slipping around the government center. It could be a parking lot, or on the street getting out of their cars, things like that. Places where we wouldn't have control over those conditions. When we get those reports in, we investigate those situations, and where there's something that we can engage in and correct the hazard, for instance, like a sump hole in the street or an unlevel sidewalk, we work with facilities. They work with the city of Shakopee to help us get that corrected. So if we broke out these numbers, it might kind of be shocking how few are actually ice caused by ice, and then how few of those are actually in places that we would expect them, like on 4th Avenue or what have you.
So is there a better way that you're thinking that we might reflect this data or present it in the future that you might be working on?
Well,
or
I think
is it just more of a conversation that we need to just keep having?
So I think behind the scenes, there's a process that goes on where we take in a report, we investigate how that happened. If we find that there are commonalities, and I have worked with Brian, one of the results of that 10 slip, trips, and falls from 22 or 22 was that problem where we had snow piling up on curbs and people having to step over this icy area. We had a couple of injuries, and so we talked about that, and that's a good idea about how this process works. Short of that, where random slips and falls happen because of an icy event like a rain and ice, it really is just random. And when we consider 940 people that represent our county, 14 in a year is really a good number, right? Especially because they may not be even recordable to OSHA. In other words, they don't rise to a level of having medical that would require us to report it to the federal level. So this is being taken care of in the background. Those numbers can be broke out into infinite, sort of charts and everything. But ultimately what you're going to find is somebody slipped on corner of 4th and Atwood, and somebody slipped on the corner of 6th and Holmes. And it doesn't help us a whole lot, really, because it was a big snowfall.
So can I really am not trying to be contrary, okay?
Sure.
But, so there's this little incline, like when you come in that 4th or that Atwood Street door, there's that little incline. And part of our job is to protect our employees, right? Part of our job is to protect the community and people that are coming in. And you watch people like baby stepping up that thing all the time. And I'm sure it has to do with sun and melt and all those things. Did we look at what it would cost to heat that sidewalk?
I did.
Interesting question.
So to actually, if you look at the whole north side, I did an estimate at, I think this is the high contingency with demo and removal. It'd be about $440,000 to heat the sidewalk on the north side. So to answer that question. And then to add further, I think a lot of, from the KPIs and what we read into, where the crosswalks are slippery, right? And I think everybody knows that. I did reach out to the city again and communicated with them, and they came out and put more aggregate, more reflective on it, and put them on notice of that issue, because a lot of people are slipping and they maintain those crosswalks as far as spraying them. I think that epoxy or latex that they're using, we may have to have them remove it and just go down to 2 lines. But at least we're having that conversation and showing them what we're dealing with too, that creates a problem to our customers and to ourselves.
Nice. Thanks.
And in response to some of that, Chris, yes, we actually deal with that all the time, and we may send a maintenance request to have more salt or more material put down there, or to blow wider, things like that. Whenever we see that, we're always trying to correct that and stay ahead of it.
Very nice. Thank you.
So one thing so Evan, do your best. This isn't really a data question. I'm struck by the number of departments we have here, which we usually try to do with these Scott County Delivers broad topics. So we have facilities, we have the sheriff's office, we have employee relations, then we have, at least in preparation for this conversation, IT and our CIO, who's not able to be here today. And running through the packet, the data I think looks like pretty good. It looks like you're achieving the goal of providing a safe and secure government center campus for the staff and for the people who are coming in to do their business here. Is that just all four of you, your areas, doing your own thing really effectively, and it just so happens that the data keeps getting better, or has this group been intentional about being maybe a little less territorial over time and finding places to collaborate toward this common goal? And if it's the latter, can you describe that process of how the four areas work together?
So we've worked really hard in the last year where we've got everybody together to kind of talk about security and safety. So we're kind of separating the two. We're separating the safety from the security. And we've gotten together to go through all of the different issues. We've outlined what some of the concerns we had, either from the survey or from the situations that we've incurred over the last couple of years. And so we've gotten together to really work together with IT, with all the structural stuff that IT does for us, and all of the things that we work with employee relations, the sheriff's office. We meet now on a regular basis to talk about these kind of situations, and we just see what we can do to prevent them. We've got some things that are in the works that we're still trying to do that we haven't been able to accomplish yet. So, but we're working on those. We hope to have those done within the next, few months here, I think. But yeah, it's been a great experience, and we worked really well together.
So I think there's another thing that not only was a team and then taking ownership of your part, Kevin brought in third party Homeland Security, so we had an outside point of view too. So we're not stuck in the shell of what our thoughts are. We also had that point of view to help us progress with security and find issues too.
Yeah, and I will add that I think that, Jake, the dynamics have changed a lot in terms of facilities, occupational health and safety. We've always worked closely with facilities to try to resolve some of the things that we have run into, problems that we've run into as far as safety issues. But I think that there's been a big focus on security being part of safety, and security being something that facilities has really taken ownership of. I think the addition of Wanda as a security person and Brian as an operational manager has made a huge difference in our ability to collaborate and to work together on some of these shared goals and visions. Everything we do security-wise, it improves our health and safety, occupational health and safety inside, including for our guests and visitors. So I think it's fantastic. I think that some of the dynamics that have changed have been for the best. And I think what you're seeing here in numbers and collaboration is really, that really reflects that group of people.
Chris, can I ask a follow-up question?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I was just asking him. I wasn't asking
This one has data, so we can go to number 5. So given that maybe was a little bit of a setup, given your good response to the previous question, slide 5, we see what I think Scott County residents would be happy to see, that the county levy as a percent of their total personal income has been going down over time. So given the collaborative nature of your work and maybe some resource sharing, what are your contributions as you see them to that decline that's pictured on slide 5? How are you, maybe a better way says, how are you increasing efficiency and how are you quantifying that?
Well, I can add a couple of things. So we've been working with IT. So one of the things is in terms of time, we've been doing a lot of things with the research on the usage of the badges. And we had a real issue with when people would leave, we wouldn't have the ability to turn their cards off. And now everything is done automatically through Active Directory. So every time a person leaves, it's automatic. It's not even it's instant. And so I think there's been a lot of efficiencies working with Greg in the IT department and getting everything done through Active Directory. And so when a new employee starts, that access is regenerated immediately based on their position and their title, and not necessarily their length of time. So that's been really effective for us. I think that's been really efficient. It saves us a lot of time from having to go into the software and do some research to find out if someone's still employed here or not. There's a lot of other things that come with that.
The Active Directory.
So-
The Active Directory really helps us in every process. We have Everbridge and.
The other thing that we're working on that we haven't quite finished yet, because we're waiting for the software to be upgraded, but one of the things that we're working on is the buttons that we have in dispatch. So it used to be when someone would call 911, we would have to make a phone, they'd have to call somebody in facilities and get in contact with us to lock down doors for certain situations. Now it's instant. When they call 911, they can literally push a button to control all the doors based on the scenario. So we're pretty close to getting that done, but we're waiting for a software upgrade to get before we can finish that. But that is a huge efficiency in terms of time and response. And the sheriff's office has been great to work with on that. So.
The other part of that is that we, thinking about how our collaboration has created some more efficiencies, is the ability to look at what we're doing individually and decide whether or not that's the right place for it. Should we move this task over to this seat? One example of that is that Wanda and I now co-administrate the Everbridge system because it seemed to be more it seemed to be more appropriate for someone in facilities to manage that, and then I assist her with that. That's a great efficiency. Active Directory for Everbridge is a great efficiency. And so where we can come together, look at what we're each doing and say, does that make sense for us to do it, or should we share those responsibilities, or where is it most appropriately assigned? We've done that, and so it gives us the opportunity to look at then, with those things in place, what is our goal, and then start looking at how we can be proactive in some of the things that we see that need to be improved. And I think that's what's happened over the last 2 years.
And this is a really good example of a migration from more of a siloed approach to more of a programmatic approach to solving problems. Ultimately, by putting a team of diverse backgrounds and different needs, different expectations, different experiences and capabilities, we've found that what facilities brings to the table, plus what ER brings to the table, what the sheriff's office brings to the table, and what IT can bring to the table, when you put everyone in the same room and work towards solving problems together, instead of kind of the way we worked many times in the past, we've come up with some sometimes very simple but very effective solutions. A good example of this is that the county invested a lot of money in panic alarm buttons. And part of our conversation was, so what do we do with this now? They were tested when we installed the system. The vendor said that the system works. How do we know what to do with those buttons? How do we understand how to communicate out? Through this collaboration, we were able to have the right conversations, communicate to employees in a consistent framework that helps employees know, call 911 if you can. If you can't, push the button. Because what we don't want is a system like this going, a technical system being deployed, separated from the communication and training aspect of how to use that resource. If we had an employee who would push a button thinking, oh, I have a panic alarm button, there's a medical emergency, I'm going to push this button, problem solved. Sounds great, feels great, doesn't solve the problem. We're going to have a deputy respond to that panic alarm, not bringing medical equipment, we're not starting an ambulance, and we're not giving pre-arrival instructions to that person. It's just a good example of how we had the opportunity to debate and have the right conversation about what's the right message to get out and how do we appropriately train staff. Furthermore, speaking of the buttons, it's an opportunity where we needed to maintain that system and how do we validate that it's a functional system. Initially, the idea was to have the contractor come in and go around and test all the buttons twice a year. We had a quote, I think, that came somewhere around $8,000 for them to go walk and do the buttons. And in the conversation, we came to the conclusion that I can pay a couple extra hours of overtime to dispatchers who, after 8 p.m., when the bulk of county business is done, I'll have 2 dispatchers who go around with the radio and talk to the dispatchers working in the center, and they will manually test and reset every single one of those buttons. So for twice a year, for what costs me really about 4 to 8 hours of total overtime across the entire year, we're able to accomplish that task and not get a $16,000 bill from a vendor. And now we have ownership. We can maintain the system. It's a win-win-win because even my staff now gets a better idea of how the physical layout of the structure is, and they get time and something unique to do, which is always good to have some job shadowing and changes in life. So it just ended up being a simple solution that wouldn't have happened if we weren't all sitting at the table looking at the problems, looking at how to collaboratively manage a system and find a positive step forward.
And I think a big part of that too is governance. And governance gave us the guidance and the ability to, we doubled our panic buttons, we've doubled all of our card readers. They limited the public access to everything on the first floor except for during board days. So a lot of that has a lot to do with the safety and security, and those decisions helped us and gave us the guidance to do what we did. So I think that's a big part of it.
So I think to add to that, with the operational costs, how we hold that is, revising the budget, looking at what we have, and to Scott's point, we really, where can we be proactive than reactive? Because in business, reactive is what's costs you that much more money. In a proactive state, we took ownership, and in facilities, we've really driven ownership down to the employees of, we need to really take care of this, to our vendors, and that's held that flat line in that budget.
There's 2 follow-up questions on the panic buttons. So that's, Evan, yes, page 11, thank you. One is, my understanding is that when someone hits one of those panic buttons that a deputy is dispatched, yes?
Correct.
But what's your opinion about the training for the department, like in that immediate area? Like there are probably people already there. Like what's our training for people that are standing there while we're waiting for a deputy? And I know they come really quickly.
In the actual training piece that we push out twice a year, we push out what the expectation is for those distress buttons, and what you can expect to have happen. And one of those clarifies that the fact that the distress button only tells dispatch where the button is being engaged, right? As far as what everyone else should be doing, it would depend on the situation generally. We would fall back to what's the situation. Is a medical emergency? How can you help in a normal medical emergency? If it's a conflict or a violent situation, obviously we want people to do different types of things. But in any case, in the training, it describes that if that button is engaged, other individuals would be okay with calling 911 as well and letting them know exactly where you are and what's going on. So that does communicate to the employees what to expect when you push the button, where the buttons are, and what you should be doing if you're a bystander to that, or if you're engaged in it. Even if you've pushed the button, as soon as you can, call 911, because as to what Captain Haas says, the buttons won't tell them whether this is a real emergency or what they may need as far as backup and EMS or whatever. So,
okay. My other question is, does your team look at this data on at some kind of interval to look at, does the buzzer in the board conference room go off all the time? Or do you look at where those hotspots are, or where those frequently used alarms go off, and do we have any problem solving around that?
Scott's people would be the ones who monitor how many times those are engaged and why they're engaged.
I think that, well, the first part of the question is our team didn't exist until a little bit ago. So historically,
not yet.
historically the answer is no. No one was paying any attention to this. Part of the functionality of this team is to be doing this assessment, and the avenue has been created to have the right people at the table because they weren't before. So as we get some actual data and we understand the history, we'll be able to actually assess that better. But we haven't had the data and we haven't had the team together.
Got it.
I will say, though, that the incidents in which somebody reached under there and pulled something or did something like that was happening before we did the education piece. Since the education piece, that really has kind of gone away as far part of our problem, right? People don't know what it is. They're just goofing around, so.
Okay. So there's a lot of great data in here. I mean, anecdotally, though, from my perspective, when I first started here at the very end of 2019, I could honestly walk into the building, walk to my office, and never use my key card all day and leave. And that was 2019. And now there's no way I can even get to my office without scanning it 15 times, at least 7 of them on the elevator, because I'm never sure if the elevator's happy with me or not. So you guys just have a lot of really amazing data about how you have improved security. But is there, for each of you, what is one challenge you are maybe facing in your areas that might not be really well reflected in this KPI data that you would really like to kind of bring forward or let us know about?
I think we outlined some of those things, some of the downfalls that we're having. One of them is with Everbridge. We have a lot of people that are not. So when you Active Directory immediately puts you into Everbridge, so your email and your work phone number are in there. But where we're having problems is where people's personal information is not in there. So we have roughly 300 to 350 people that have not registered their own personal phone numbers. So if something happens, they're going to get an email or a phone call at their work desk, but they're not going to get anything if they don't register their personal cell phone numbers. And so that's been a struggle for us to get people communicating that.
And we just to follow up on that, we do have a campaign. We have constant reminders to people. If you want this to come to your cell phone, you need to go in there, update your preferences. Education is, I would say that between our reaching out to them after they've been hired and then what we do all year with our drills and everything else, there's always a reminder to update those things.
I think tailgating we outlined is an issue. People that tailgate inside the doors, we see that occasionally in the cameras. We see that happening. That and propping doors, that's a huge issue for us. The fire alarm, when the fire alarm goes off and that door's propped open, it doesn't shut like it should. There's lots of security and safety things that go on with that if that doesn't work. I think we're having an issue right now where we can't push the buttons. I guess they're called the buttons across the street. We keep trying to figure out what a good name for those buttons are, but the ones that 911 pushes, the security buttons to lock all the doors, we're having an issue with the software until that gets resolved. We can't test those. We can't do anything with it until that's done. So that's been a weakness for us. We're working through that now, and hopefully they'll have that upgrade in the next month or so.
I think the biggest thing is missing the people that didn't comment on this. These KPIs, these comments are very important. I, throughout the year, review this where I can do better, not only in this survey, but the larger survey of all KPIs. And so when we get all employees to participate, it's better feedback that we know we need to move on something. So we don't know what we don't know. I think it's getting that participation, getting those comments in there that helps us improve. That would be the biggest thing that we're missing. Another
Gap area that we have is that thankfully we have a pretty great employee base, and we're in a neighborhood, a residential area, so we don't have a lot of commercial crime in the area. There's a lot of benefits to where we sit. But just like any other facility, whether it be a business, a school, a government facility, we have the potential for something bad to happen here. We're working through the steps. We're going to be aligned with the nationally standardized process for locking down, securing, being in a hold situation. So that's a big step that our group's been able to take and implement. But we have a huge gap in how we communicate to our employees and our guests. We've got the Everbridge system, and Everbridge does what Everbridge does. It's a way to get to people's emails, and if they've opted in, it's a way to send a message to their cell phones. But in a crisis, one of the first things that will happen is cell phone towers get overloaded. So if we're relying on a system that's based on notifying people's cell phones or giving them an email, we know historically that when things get bad and when there's a lot of congestion, they don't work. So we don't have an alternative system like a PA system in the buildings that can rapidly notify not just our employees, but if you look at any given point in time, we have a lot of guests in our facility, and our guests are not registered with Everbridge. So we're reliant on the employees getting the message and the employees taking action to notify the guests that are near them on what the best action is to protect the entire population of our employees and guests in the facility. So a big gap we have right now is we just don't have a way to truly do a mass notification where everybody's going to get a common message and common direction to take protective actions.
Say, Chris, can I ask Scott a question? Redkey?
Yeah.
So can you just talk a little bit about the investment in the law enforcement center courtroom and what that's meant and how that is more efficient for us as well? I haven't heard much on that one, so I'm kind of curious. That was a big deal when we did it.
Yeah, no, I would certainly say that, excuse me, the courtroom in the law enforcement center is fantastic. It's helped us in two areas that I see, obviously security. So just not having to take people, transport people to and from the Justice Center has been great, especially for those instances. We do have people that are maybe a little out of control and keeping them in the jail or at least attached to the jail is always a better security precaution to take. That's worked both ways. So either we've recommended that to the courts or the courts have, for whatever reason, know something that we don't and have advised us, we'll come over and see that person in the LEC courtroom. So that's been great. The other area that it's been a big boon for us has been just in volume. So in those days when we do have 20 plus people to transport to and from court in any given day, keeping those people in the law enforcement center is just much more efficient. So we don't have to go very far, obviously, to get those people in court. When they're in that courtroom, I mean, I do think that there's no question that the LEC courtroom is a safer environment. If you've been over there, you can kind of get that sense from where the in custody population sort of is during the court proceedings. We do have a point of entry to that courtroom on the public side also. So I'm very pleased with the law enforcement courtroom. We use it for daily for bail hearings, which is by far and away our highest volume of people that need to go to court, and then for the other high volume court appearances throughout the week. So it's been fantastic to have access to that.
So I remember the old one and some of the judges' concerns. So this one meets their needs and their concerns then as well.
Absolutely. And you can tell that in the sense that they will reach out to us to use it, right? In the past, that didn't happen very, very, very often where they were asking to use the courtroom in the basement of the jail. So it's much better the way it is today.
I know, Chris, you had one last comment. I think unless the facilitators have a burning question, I'll let Chris finish it up.
Go ahead. My question is just at the end of the day, is the campus safer than it was 5 years ago?
Absolutely.
And why is that?
Well, I think it's just if we look at what we've done with our infrastructure, even if we were talking about, and part of that is education, talking about see something, say something, or tailgating, or what have you. The security levels have been implemented that even with, for instance, the employee's entry door, even if somebody were to tailgate in there who was unauthorized, which has happened, people wander in there thinking they're in someplace they should be, you still have the interior security at that point, which is really a nice feature. So I think that when we look at how those accesses have been controlled and how they are right now controlled through the computer system, I think we alleviate a lot of different things that could happen in areas where we wouldn't want them to happen. I think mainlining all of our guests and visitors in very generalized areas of this facility has greatly reduced the areas where somebody might end up being at a greater risk level of acting out or what have you. So that's just my perspective on how the facility security piece that worked out. When we were going through that in the new building construction, I was really happy to see them take that so seriously. And I think that's created a lot of good security, safety issues.
I guess I'll add in the short term that I've been here, we've not only collaborated more outside, I know my last walkthrough was with the fire marshal and will be with the police chief, that they're knowing of our surroundings and how quickly they can react around our infrastructure is going to make them faster to the response. That makes us safer. So I think we as a core group, we're working strong together. We're working outside with our partners. So just in that short time, we are very, that much more safer and responsive.
Absolutely. And by the way, our federal Homeland Security representative who came to do an audit was quite impressed with our entire complex here. So we were meeting a lot of the criteria that they would cover. We already meet. So.
All right, thank you.
I will tell you too that Brian and I attend a meeting with all the other counties and all the cities, and I didn't realize how much more advanced we were than many of them. So I was really impressed with our progress. So.
Very good, thank you. With that, Madam Chair.
Thank you, thank you. The questions were really good today. They answered a lot of our questions already, and so wonderful to hear about this team and seeing how much progress you've made in a very short time at working together and really getting rid of some of the silos here. I'm going to go first to Commissioner Wolf. He's been patiently waiting.
It's not the tailgating, I think I'm guilty of it, and I think others might be. So how many, is it really tailgating, or is it just one employee that, like, if maybe Ron lets me in? I mean, is that what it is mostly? I know you wouldn't, but
we do think about our tailgating.
I think if anyone would.
Yeah, we think about our tailgating as being problematic only in as much as if I'm coming in the building and Scott is behind me, obviously I can identify him. But for instance, last week I was going in the employees entry at Government Center West, and 3 people tried to enter behind me, did not have their badges displayed. I did not know them. And so I immediately asked them if I could help them, or if they were employees. They all pulled out their IDs. I think that when you start looking at these big groups of people coming in, then we're trying to encourage people to do the right thing, make sure that you either know who you're dealing with at that point, and if you don't, then ask them. Because there can be times, and I had it happen to me, where I walked into a door and somebody followed me, and I stopped and said, wait a minute, I don't recognize you. Are you an employee? And they go, no, I'm supposed to go to court. Okay, well, let me walk that way, you know? So that does happen from time to time, but we really want to educate people about taking the initiative to think about that. Who's following you?
I just add in, all of these technical systems that we apply are only as good as the people that are working within them. And as we look at this, the scenario of tailgating specifically, we have to organizationally prioritize fixing that. And part of it comes down to, Kevin's an employee right now. We all know Kevin. But at some point in time, Kevin's not going to be working here anymore. And we don't want employees being, oh, that's Kevin. Come on in, Kevin. We want employees to understand that they're supposed to be carrying their ID with them. It's supposed to be displayed. That's our current expectation of employees. If we've got people walking through the building, we don't want them to be in the habit of, oh, I know that person, it's okay. Because we don't know what's going on in individuals' lives. So building and training and really taking into account the human factor is one of the most important considerations when we're talking about any of these systems.
Okay. And can I just have, on page 9, there's all that injuries. Other than COVID, well, there was only 1 in 20. But, so there was 34 reported injuries in 2023. As the closer you get to 0, how much does that save? Is there savings on insurances or anything like that, or workman's comp, or?
Well, there is.
Is there an equation to that?
Yeah, we do, Commissioner, great question. We do have a comp rate or work comp rating, and from year to year that changes based on our experience of injuries in the year prior. And so our premiums are estimated premiums, and then as the actualization of the injuries come through, that premium may increase, or it may increase for the following year due to injury rates. Again, sometimes this gets a little bit skewed also because 34 injuries is 34 reported incidences where people had something happen to them. Doesn't necessarily require a bunch of medical costs and things like that. Your premiums are also reflected by what the cost of your events or incidents are. If we say there are 34 events in 2023, we may have only a third of those that had anything medically that went on. They went to a clinic or they got evaluated or something like that. And so that's the premium is reflected in the amount of injuries you have and the level of injury that you have and the cost that the insurer incurs.
So that's about 1% if I heard you correct, 1% have injuries that are maybe cost money or more serious?
So there's our insurer wants us to report when somebody reports an injury to them. Okay. Then there's a bunch of people who fall and have things happen, don't ever report the injury. So we have 34 that have been reported. Of those then, there's certain ones that meet the criteria of being more involved medically, where we may have to report those to the federal. So of those 34, we may have had 10 reportables to the federal. Those 10 are ones that cost us money or a person was out or they were on restrictions. Those will cost MCIT money, and that will be reflected in our next year's premiums.
I got it. Okay.
Next year's premiums.
Great. All right. Thank you.
Go ahead, Commissioner Brennan.
I have one comment and one question. Living in this neighborhood, I do get the occasional calls regarding snow plowing or snow removal on the sidewalks, and I always refer them, and there's always such a quick response. So that's why I want to say that I really appreciate that. When you talked about the duress button, do the employees get trained? Do they go through a scenario where they, this isn't an issue and this is how we respond, and real life practice type of things?
We haven't had real life active training in that way. Our hope always is that the directors and managers are taking, once we push out training in that way, that they are having those small group conversations in their own group meetings, that they'll talk about how that works. So I did initially send out a bunch of information to supervisors, managers, and ask them to sit down with their employees and talk about what their expectations are when these situations happen. But short of that, the information that is pushed out in that training talks a little bit about that, but in terms of going to the place where you have your meeting, when you go into that room, look for that button, make sure you know where you're sitting and what you would do in the event that something were to take place. So,
I think to add to that, because we haven't finished the buttons for the 911 dispatch center yet, until that software gets upgraded, once that's done, there's a huge initiation to get the training out, not only on those buttons, but on how the doors work and how to assist other people that maybe are not employees here and what their role is in that scenario. So there's a lot of training that's coming out.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Questions, comments?
Maybe a little bit of a tangent one, but you mentioned the law of the courtroom across the street. Is that high utilization or?
Yes.
I mean, well, anything's high over what was before, right? But is it utilized on a very regular basis, and are we seeing those efficiencies based on that?
Yeah, it's used every single day, again, for the most high volume reasons. So it is used all the time. It is used then also for high profile reasons. So absolutely.
Good. That's all I had. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, everybody. I think this is one of these areas where, because we care about our employees, of course, we don't want them to be hurt. We care, we love them. And also, it costs money when people get hurt, when people leave because they don't feel safe here. It's important. It's a hard balance to have because we could spend millions of dollars keeping people safe. So I really appreciate your team and finding out that best balance and how we can be most efficient and most comprehensive over our whole organization. It is very important. So thank you. Thanks to everybody who's involved in today's presentation.